All right. So if you have been here before, you know what we're doing next. If you're new, grab your remote, have the episode of Dash and Lily, which is on Netflix, have it started but paused right at the 0 second mark. You're going to just barely see that little Netflix end coming in, right? Just pause it right there. That's good because when we press play together, it will just start immediately. And we're going to do that on the count of three. Everybody ready to do this?
Ready.
Yeah.
Ready?
Ready.
1, 2, 3.
The music in this is so cute.
Yes, it is.
This show makes me want to go to New York at Christmas time.
I was just about to say that.
Do
Any
it. Do
any
it.
of you are welcome to hang out. I will make you dinner and we'll go out to the Strand.
I'll send you to Midtown by yourself, though. It's crazy.
They're
I
mean.
want to know a little bit about the Christmas carolers in New York. That's a question that I'm going to have for any New Yorkers afterwards.
I really love how Diana's like, you're welcome to come here, but there are limits. There are places I will not go.
This holiday market is one of the best in the country.
I was there last week.
I like the emoji industry.
There is like an international emoji like committee or something like that.
Yeah, I mean the emoji consortium is basically who kind of manages all of the new emojis that come in.
The emoji consortium?
Yeah, like it's a I mean, emojis are just a font, so it's
Right.
basically like a group of it's basically a group of folks that you know approve new emojis that come into the system.
So the fun fact here is that the market is directly down the street from the Strand. So it's an easy leap that he'd be walking there.
I think the people who work at the Strand are typically nicer than this, but they do tend to be, um, they're stereotyped as snobby and snarky, because they have to know so much. My husband actually tried to do the test, to interview. They make you do this like really crazy rigorous test, and you can't get anything wrong. He did not get that job when he was in high school.
Yeah, I was
It's
about
very
to
hard.
say you have to take a test to even be considered for employment there. And you can take the test online if you'd like to see how hard it is. It's insane.
I love that. I mean, the handwriting kind of gives it away, no?
You would think so. But maybe some men have very feminine
Is
writing.
that just terrible stereotyping?
I think so. I have terrible handwriting. That's why usually I don't handwrite
No, I
letters.
know, but it's
I
the
will
opposite
type.
though. That handwriting was really cute.
It's so funny because they just renovated the Strand before they filmed this. Like, I wonder if that had anything to do with it. Because the front door and the staircase looked like crap, and now they look very fancy.
I don't even remember being able to use the staircase in like the early 2000s.
Are are books really that high up? Like, there's
Yeah.
that one shot where it's
Oh
down
yeah.
the thing
Th-
and
th-
there's like
Yes.
literally like
this
how do
is
you
the
get
store.
wow.
Yes.
I remember when I went in there, and I've been in some big bookstores in London and stuff too, and I just was like, this is overwhelming. Where do I?
It's magical.
I know, but
I
when you
mean,
only have one day,
you realize that this is like a full on memento password cracking that's happening
That's
right
Don't
what
now.
don't
I
get
was
any
thinking.
ideas, John.
I
Please.
was like, is this where he got the inspiration for Memento?
subliminally, maybe he did.
And this area is the store is the annex. It's like completely separate from the actual store. It's where they hold all their events and all of that.
This is the room where we were going to possibly have our wedding, where they have weddings and private events, but
Yep.
it wound up being twice as much to get married there as it was at the place we chose.
I love that. Where did he just pull that book out of, though? Was he carrying that one around with?
Yeah, he was carrying it from the last clip.
Wow.
This is so awesome. I mean, this is so awesome.
Such a good song. It's gonna be really hard to stop watching, John. This is one of the most bingeable shows for me.
It's very good. I mean, watching it again a year later, it's like it still feels completely new.
Oh, my other favorite place, Two Boots. This is the best pizza in the world.
So you're saying it's the best pizza in New York?
I would
Or just
argue definitely not, but
I I think so.
I am a
I think it
purist.
is.
Did
Two
somebody say
Boots,
best pizza?
well, Two
It's
Boots
the
does like different like combos of pizzas, like all really interesting. Whatever they do that day is like specific to that day. Whereas like I'm a purist, like give me a Neapolitan, like plain cheese.
I'm
okay.
I'm
So
I'm the same.
if you want like plain pizza or like traditional pizza, yes, but it's the Two Boots are Italy and Louisiana, so the toppings are like a little bit New Orleans style. So good. Look at their menu. It is so good. It's like my favorite pizza.
They made this location of Two Boots look a lot cleaner than it actually is. I'll say that. But it's the East Village Two Boots. There were a couple and the other one closed, I believe.
Yeah, they kind of just didn't pay their taxes. And so a
That'll do
bunch
it.
of their locations closed. But this one is still open.
And this one is the biggest one. They have like actual tables.
I love the relationship between these two guys, or the friendship, I should say. So they really have DVD as well there.
It
I
used to be a video store.
I was like I was gonna say I don't remember seeing it, but I've only been there a couple times.
What a bummer to drop your pizza.
Man, we've had a lot of New York love letters lately, right?
It's the best kind of love letter
Here
in
at
I
here
my
at
love it.
Here at Remarkist, it feels like the holiday season is really like all about New York City.
in my biased opinion. I think that's the way it should be.
I will say, I think I just watched the series again last weekend while I was sick, fittingly. And I have to say, I think it looks so authentic to New York at Christmas. Like they really didn't shine it up too much. It really does feel like this, in my opinion. So I really love the series for that.
Yeah, this also feels very realistic in that like the parents are kind of usually not around for a lot of teens that grow up in Manhattan and they're off doing their own thing like this.
I love this guy's sweater, by the way.
I was
That's
just thinking the exact same thing. That's such a beautiful sweater.
Cable knit. Can never go wrong with those, right?
yeah, I have a really cool like brown, like chocolate brown cable knit that it's not a sweater, it's like a um what would you call it? Like buttons. It like kind of wraps around me a little and buttons. I don't know what those are called. And it's like a little bit below my like it's like goes to my around my thighs or a little above my thighs.
Sounds warm.
Also, something that's really cool now watching this for the second time, knowing what happens, what's really interesting because so much of this is like a puzzle, right? And because I already know the solution of the puzzle, I can now watch it um, knowing the solutions to a lot of things. And I'm seeing so much that I didn't see before because, of course, I didn't really know what I should be looking for.
Which side of Macy's is that entrance on?
That's the that's I think the Seventh Avenue side. It's like it's literally the side of the building, not the front entrance. Sorry, the 6th Avenue side. That's what I meant.
The actor, the elf actor, I just realized he's on Dexter. Anybody who's watching the new Dexter, he's one of the ensemble, and that I just realized it now. The music
Voting
on
report.
this, the music in this series truly is a character.
Also, I just realized that Elf plays another character in this.
Still haven't seen her face. I love that. I love the reveal here. That was just so cool. They really did everything about hiding her face and then just revealed it when the two of them are looking at each other. Oh, stop it. This was so good.
The girl who plays her is so good.
uh, oh my goodness. What did everyone think? Who is watching it for the first time that's up here on the couch with us? Anybody?
I am.
And
Um, it's cute.
oh my goodness, you're not there yet.
I don't I don't love love stories. Like, I mean, it like
It's
the
more than a
cutesy
love
sort, I
story,
don't
though.
know.
It's more
I
than a love
I
story.
I would have to see more of it to fully know
But at the very
how I
least,
feel.
like, love story aside, the narrative, like, where it's this sort of puzzle that he's having to, I mean, I think there's something kind of fun at the very least in the scavenger hunt aspect of it all.
I
Does
think
anybody else
there's
that's on the
something
beanbags want to come on up and
traumatizing
hang
about
with us?
that. I
And
I think there I think given what we've been through with Remarkist, there's something very traumatizing and
the
triggering about that aspect of it. So I
anybody
think
who is
this
down
should
there
come with a trigger warning.
anybody who's down there on the beanbags and would like to join us up here on the couch for some lively discussion, please come on up and give your perspective on this. Regina, Hunter, Stacy. So consensus feels trauma. What's going? How are people feeling?
Mandy, I think you need to give it a chance because I watched
I
it on a
I'll
whim last
I'll
year.
keep watching it. It's gonna take more than one episode to convince me.
Yeah, I didn't think I was gonna like it after the first episode. I didn't love it, but I got intrigued by the puzzle in it. And it actually kind of gave me in some ways, and I don't think it was just New York City around Christmas. It kind of gave me like serendipity type vibes of like, trying to meet that person. So I like it.
So this
Yeah,
is
I
my
was
first
thinking that
time.
too. Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry, Hunter. Go ahead. Go
No,
ahead, Hunter.
you go ahead.
Okay. I was just gonna say this is my first time watching. And normally I don't usually go for shows like this. So I kind of went in not knowing what to expect, and I'm still not there yet, but I will say I am intrigued of what is to be expected further. I actually was kind of sad that the first episode ended so quickly. I said I want to watch the next one. I kind of want to binge it all by myself, but I won't. I won't. I'll watch it fresh with you all. But
It's
I
weird. I
will
thought that
say
they
I
were
am very
40.
curious.
I thought they were 45-minute episodes. I'm now realizing these are 23-minute episodes. So they're a half hour. It was a half hour format,
That's
not
why
an
I
hour
said it's
long
going to be
format.
really hard to stop. It's like I just want to
I
get right
really
into the
was
next one.
tempted to go on, but I
Yeah,
said
I actually
no, no, I
I
gotta stop myself.
I think I also need to adjust the end times of all of these, because if they're half hour, then uh an hour and a half might be too long for us to be here before harvest time. But uh the things that I love about the series, and I think that we're seeing it already, I just I love how I just love how New York City is presented at Christmas time. I really love it. Um, and I just I think that this whole narrative of a puzzle, like having to sort of unravel this puzzle, um, in order to in order to get to know our characters, I think is just such an innovative, interesting way of telling a story. And this one was called Dash, right? The next one is called Lily. So I'm imagining that next episode is going to be from her perspective. Um, that's that's what I was imagining a year ago when I was watching this. And
That's probably
um,
how the book is too, because Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist was like that. The chapters were like by perspective of the characters, if I remember correctly.
I
I
really
just love.
want to read the book now after watching this first episode. Like I went onto Amazon and added it to my cart.
Yeah, I just think that I just love when uh, writers play with like narrative in that way, and especially with perspective and with voice. That's like we were talking recently in the Arrival watch about the novella that the movie Arrival is based on, and one of the things I love so much about it is that it plays with voice. It uses two different voices, third person and second person. I just, in general, you've kind of got me hooked, like from the get go. I already give you points if you're like playing with a different way of telling a story than is typical. And I think that this is really fun, that we as the audience are kind of being asked to crack a memento here. um, I get it if that is truly truly traumatizing, but I'm really enjoying it. I think it's great. And I don't know what it is about New York City at Christmas time that I'm, sorry, I apologize for anyone who sort of feels like I'm not giving their city, its fair dues, but there's just something about New York City at Christmas time that is very pleasant to watch.
I feel that way too about New York and London. I like to watch things set in London at Christmas
Totally,
time for that
the
same
same,
reason.
for the same reason. Like that Ted Lasso episode,
Oh,
Christmas episode,
beautiful.
it is so awesome because London at Christmas is such an awesome
It's a great
feeling.
backdrop. Yeah.
We
And I,
watched we watched the Ted Lasso Christmas episode, and Babsy and I both we were both on the same page that we need to book a trip to London around Christmas time, just so that we can be in London at Christmas time.
yeah, I think they I don't know, Diana, you and Sabrina could probably tell me this, but in London, I think it's most of December's like that. Is New York pretty much December? It's just
I
all like,
mean, right after Halloween, it starts going up. I mean, I think some of the decorations went up earlier this year, but the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree is always lit at like December 3rd, like right after it's usually the week after Thanksgiving. So Thanksgiving's on a Thursday, it's usually the Wednesday after. I know because I worked in Rockefeller Center for 3 years and it was the worst ever because you'd watch that tree go up and then the crowds would get bigger and bigger every day all day long. Like there were times where going out for lunch was like an impossibility because you couldn't get down the street with Radio City, and they do 4 shows a day, and it's like a whole thing. Which is why I said, yeah, you can go. I don't, I'm going to have to go with my family this year because we are taking my niece to see the show, but like, I'm kind of like bracing myself for those crowds. But yeah, I mean, it starts early December, you know, like usually like right before Thanksgiving's, you know, those decorations start going up, and then December all the holiday markets open. There are a bunch of them that look exactly like the Union Square one. There's one in Columbus Circle. Let's see. There's a few. There are definitely a bunch of them. So they all kind of look like that, and they get busier and busier as the month goes on. So like 2 or 3 weeks ago was actually really awesome here to go to those things and walk around. Now it's a little different. People are coming for the holidays and it's very crowded. But yeah, all that stuff goes up last week of November, because in November too we have the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. So things start, you know, getting at the end of that parade, what Santa comes down the like Fifth Avenue, you're like, okay, here we go, it's happening, you know, and like it seems like everything in the city changes overnight as of that parade.
Sabrina, you've seen this series, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and you like it.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. How, would you say that it took you a bit to get into it, or had you already read the book, so you were already primed?
I read the book many years ago. It was a favorite book of mine in terms of YA novels. That the story really resonated with me. And when I started watching the show, I hadn't read the book in a long time. So when I saw it, it took me right in. I was like, "Oh, this is exactly what I thought it might look like."
Oh,
But
that's cool.
also there are elements that they kind of shifted a little bit to make it very 2020, like, you know, because the book came out probably about 10 to 15 years ago. And I said, this feels like the book, but it also feels like it's been updated a bit, and I liked that.
That's cool.
I will say, even if I end up not loving the show, I do like reading love stories more than I like watching them, so I might enjoy the books more than I do the show.
Can I put kernels down on you liking the show?
Do it.
Sure.
How many?
Um, I'm so convinced that you're gonna like the show that I will bet you 100 kernels that you like the show, and I think that you will feel horrible. You will like the show enough that you will feel horrible like lying about that just to get those 100 kernels.
Okay. It's a deal.
Okay, 100 kernels from me, 100 kernels from you, right? You're ready for that?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, good. If you don't like the show, 100 kernels your way. But if you say, you know what, I have to admit, I really like the show. Even if it's that, it can't. Yeah, I'm not expecting you to be like, oh my god, my favorite show in the world. Like you just have to be like, you know what, I really liked it. You know,
Okay.
and I don't think you'll lie about that because I think you'll like it.
All right. Deal.
Deal.
How
So,
many episodes is it for the? Is it only one season? How many?
It's only one season. I believe it's 10 episodes. It might be 8.
I'm scared to look. I don't want to accidentally read something and get
I'll
spoiled.
look. Hang on a sec. It is 10 episodes. So wait, no, it's 8 episodes, and then they just have some teasers.
So Sabrina, I think it was you that mentioned one of the things that bothered me like the first time I watched it is, you know, I kept thinking these characters were older. But then I'm like, why are these teenagers and like where are the parents? But you had mentioned, I guess this is pretty true for Manhattan teenagers.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot speak for everyone. I can't even I don't know. My experience, I didn't grow up here, so I didn't have this experience, but my husband and a lot of my friends, whether it's friends I know through him or friends I went to college with, seem to have had this experience. And I will say that these seem to be, like, at least on Dash's side so far, like kind of wealthier, like based on his dad's apartment. He's kind of coded as like upper class or upper middle class New Yorker. And I feel like something about it, like the parents are just off doing their own thing. You have a lot of like flexibility and freedom because you're using the subway. Like you don't need to drive or anything. So basically, you can be out and about by yourself when you're younger than, say, 16 for most, teenagers in this country. Um, Frankly, the only thing that I have not noticed is that um, there is a like horrendous amount of drug usage that I've heard about among like teenagers growing up in Manhattan in wealthier families, and that's not something you really see so much here. Um, but I'm not going to spoil the show. I just don't see a lot of like some of the
I
darker
mean, not.
stuff. It's
I
more
mean,
lighthearted.
aside from the heroin scene, a little deeper into the season. But you're right. There's not a ton of it.
Yeah, I would say like I know people who like did cocaine when they were that age because they had access and it was New York and they were wealthy. And it's, that's what always scares me about having kids in New York is that it's a little different from what I experienced, which was mostly just being on the internet all the time because I didn't have a driver's license and I grew up in the suburbs.
Well, one thing that the book makes very clear that isn't super clear here is that Dash, what he did was he told his mom he'd be with his dad at Christmas for like, be staying in the city with his dad. And he told his dad that he would go on vacation with his mom. And so that's why, like, and both parents with their respective significant others have gone on their own like holiday vacations. And so he maneuvered it so that he would be stuck in the city by himself.
Yeah.
And he told everyone in his life like, oh yeah, I'm not going to be here. So he's kind of, except for like Boomer, so like he's kind of like, you know he made it so that he's got like 2 weeks to himself without having to answer to anyone, which I think is definitely I feel like we've like saw that in like Gossip Girl, like where it's like you could kind of play the parents against each other because no one's really paying that much attention, and it's clear that his parents don't talk to each other. um but yeah, but like one of my friends grew up on the Upper West Side and definitely didn't do any drugs, definitely didn't have a life like that. Like
That's
she,
true.
like it's just sort of like, I guess, like
I
who your
I
parents
think
are and
it's
what your
parenting.
experiences are.
I think it's parenting. I do think that like kids who grow up in big cities do tend to be more independent because of how the city um kind of requires that people be mobile in a very particular way, right? Like, I couldn't, living in the suburbs, I really couldn't be mobile in my city until I actually had a driver's license because in order to be mobile in the suburbs and get places, you either have to walk for like an hour or you have need to have a car. But in a big city like Chicago or New York, you need a subway. And so a lot of kids actually begin that early. A lot of kids use those means of public transportation, even when they're in, school
Yeah.
or junior high. And so that independence comes a lot earlier, I think, for kids who live in a big city than they do. And I think that the drug stuff and who you spend time with and whatnot, I actually don't think that changes all that much. There are plenty of suburban kids who get into drugs and do all that kind of stuff, and I do think that it's more like just a mix of the friends that you hang out with, maybe a bit of the kid's own personality and curiosity mixed with parenting, and that like will determine how curious a teenager is about getting into those types of drugs. But I have friends who have kids in big cities like Chicago that have allowed their kids to go to concerts, at like in their early teens using subway, or in Chicago, the L, and they're not really like into drugs or any of that kind of stuff.
Well, the
Yeah.
MTA actually, they have a student fare pass, and many schools set up the kids with a student subway subway card. So like that's what I had in high school, and I lived in Queens, so it's not Manhattan, but like, some schools have school buses, but definitely not in Manhattan. And like, so you sort of start at 14, it's like given to you by your school. You get a subway pass, so it's like a subsidized fare card. And so most schools, that's, who the kids who live here, that's what they're taking.
And I would have to
Yeah,
say, oh, sorry, Stacy, you want to say?
oh yeah, I was just gonna say it's the same thing here in Cincinnati, but it's not. We don't have a subway. It's the bus system, so we don't have yellow school buses for Cincinnati Public. But I think most of why I think they appear older is I'm like, are teenagers really this clever? Because the ones I worked with were not.
That might be just a I mean, I don't know. Uh, I feel. I mean, I guess that's just that's the teenager. I mean, I know some very clever teenagers, really smart teenagers, but it's a story. So ultimately, we tell stories about extraordinary things, because otherwise, why do we wouldn't want to watch a story about something that is not that doesn't have elements of extraordinary in them, because they're boring. Where our lives are. Our lives have plenty of unextraordinary things in them. So I think that there's presenting us with the cleverest of teenagers to help us build a narrative like this works for me. One thing I was going to also point out about the teenagers in big cities, it goes to what we were talking about in the Maisel Gab session the other day, which is the idea that the eyes on the street actually makes a big city a safer place for your teenagers to be independent than, say, a suburb where teenagers do have to get into cars and drive, longer distances, and potentially, you know, um, could get drunk and be driving drunk, or be in cars
Yeah.
with people who are driving drunk, right? So there's actually I think, a lot of danger. You could argue a lot more danger for the teenager in a suburb who is venturing out into the world to sort of, to be independent, than the teenager in the big city who has all these eyes on them, as a sort of like buffer form of protection, and who begins to become independent at an earlier age than the suburban kid. Um, I just think that there is an argument to be made there that that it's actually a bit safer.
Yeah, I mean, Jane Jacobs wrote about that in her pivotal book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. And Jane Jacobs, being a character in Maisel, I can connect this back. She said that it was actually safer for kids to grow up in a place like the West Village because, well, at the time in the 50s, like people's mothers and grandmothers and whoever, like shopkeepers, would like have an eye on like the street kind of at all times. So the kids, like even just like little kids, could go out and play on the streets in every neighborhood. It was almost like there were babysitters for those kids to grow up there, and it was a lot safer than places where the parents weren't like looking out. There wasn't anyone to look out for the kids. Um, but yeah, and also about the drug thing, I think it's not necessarily. I want to clarify that it's not necessarily that kids in the city were going to do drugs more often. I just think that New York kids in particular have wilder stories. I feel like there are just so many wild things that happen. And I think that that's actually kind of just like because New York is such a wild place where wild things happen. Like this kind of story would make sense in real life because that's like a New York story.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah. I'm trying to think, like, I wish my sister was here because my sister grew up in the suburbs of Miami, but she left to live in New York as a teenager, or I guess like preteen, or no teen, I guess, around 14, 15. um and and so she went from like a very suburban life to suddenly being thrust into all of this independence and city and subways and whatnot. And I wonder what the difference would be for somebody who's like, for a kid who's like suddenly exposed to that after having gotten to like suburban sprawl and whatnot, versus the kid who's been there since they were born. They were on subways with their parents, when they were little kids. This also reminds me. This conversation reminds me of a Japanese cultural tradition of little toddlers um, being sent out by their parents alone into the city to go get something. That's like a very important rite of passage for like little kids that are like 3 years old, that their parents like basically like from the front door, or like, you know like, go get a newspaper from the newspaper stand, or go to the butcher. There's an order of beef waiting for us there, and the little like 3-year-old kid has to get to that store, crossing streets, crossing crosswalks, doing all of that stuff all by themselves, and get back. And it's like a very important tradition in Japanese culture. Is anyone familiar with this?
Yeah.
I've actually seen that too. And it was really interesting to watch them send their little kid out with some money.
Yeah, with the money, give them the money, and then they go, and they're like at crosswalks, like not sure what to do. And of course, nothing is going to happen to them because there are people everywhere and they all know this tradition, so they know that this little kid is doing this thing, and so they of course make sure that the kid doesn't go when they're not supposed to. And of course the little kid is very nervous, scared to cross it, so there's these other people maybe helping him or her across the street, and they get there, and then when they get back, it's this like triumphant, victorious moment of, you did it, and the parents are super excited and so happy to have you back, and it's just like a really big deal, but a big rite of passage in terms of independence in the culture.
Yeah, it's funny because there's a Bloomberg piece, if you look it up, like if you look up Japanese little kids subway, the first thing that comes up is this piece about how, yes, that's to do with like the independence of children, but also because it's something that is so common, like adults understand what it is, there is like social trust around that. Because I would be less worried about like my toddler doing what they need to do, and I'd be more worried about like the adults around like not knowing, or I don't know. There's
Oh
actually a
yeah.
really
Oh, I mean, it's not like,
there's a horrible, I'm not going to tell the story, but there's a horrible like famous story about a kid in New York who wanted to do the same thing, and the very first day he got lost and then he was murdered. So like I just think about that every time,
yeah,
but
no, I'm
it's so
certainly
hard.
not. I'm certainly not suggesting that that's something that should happen here. It's clear that that the way that it works there is so linked to cultural norms and
Yeah.
social norms, and that the society kind of has this unspoken pact that that we understand what's going on, and we help and whatnot. And because we haven't, as a culture, developed that, not that we couldn't have, but that we just
Yeah.
haven't, it wouldn't really work here. But the point is less about whether or not that's right or wrong, or
Oh yeah.
it's really more just about that speaks to this idea of when do we allow our children to be more independent and venture out into the world and get a taste for what it is without us. And there's just, the Japanese culture is sort of like an extreme example of we want it to happen when they're basically babies. um, but I would
Well, how are
argue that
you?
like there is a difference even between how Americans do it in the suburbs versus how Americans do it in big cities.
Well, John, as a parent of, I guess, how old is Josie? Is she one yet,
She she'll
or
be she'll
still?
be one on January 25th.
So as a
I'm
parent
I'm
of,
through I'm through like saying how old she is because I can never do the math. I just know when her
okay.
birthday. I know when her birthday is. It's January 25th. So whatever from today to January 25th is, that's how old she is.
All right. Well, how do you feel about all of this? Like, I mean, you're in LA, which requires a car, but and you probably have a few more years before you have to really think about this. But as a parent, is this making you think about like your approach?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I grew up in the suburbs, and my childhood was from a pretty early age. I'd say at least around seven, seven or so, 7, 8, was like go off into the neighborhood from the moment you finished your breakfast on like a weekend, right? From the moment you finish your breakfast till like the till the sun comes down, maybe with like a lunch break in between that you did when you in that you went home for, was just off all over the neighborhood, on our bikes and exploring and all of that. And I don't think that I would have the stomach to let her do that here where we live, um, because Los Angeles is a really odd. It's a really odd city. It doesn't really have that dense urban thing that you get in Chicago or New York that I actually do feel has a lot of eyes on the street, right? Like I always felt when I lived in Chicago, like it wouldn't matter what time of the day, at what time of the night that I was walking the streets, it was always alive. Like it was always awake. There was always a sense that there were people around. And because of that, you just never got worried that anything bad would happen because you always knew that there was somebody watching that, and no one would dare to do that while someone was watching. In the suburbs, you feel like there isn't that eye on the street, but for whatever reason, during the day, it's not really as much of a concern, or wasn't when we were young. Here in Los Angeles, there's this weird hybrid of the two. Like we live in an area of Los Angeles that's really spread out. Because of it, there's not really a lot of eyes on the street, and yet it feels kind of urbany and a little seedy in areas. So it has this weird, like, kind of the seediness that we associate with a big city like a New York or Chicago or whatnot, right? Like the kind of grimy, grittiness, but without the eyes on the street. And so because of that, I think that here where we're living in Los Angeles, I wouldn't be fully comfortable with her just going off. However, but I don't know. It's hard to say how I'd feel when she's a bit older. We have a high school that's relatively close, and at a certain time of the day, our whole like the area of town where we live in is just like flooded with high school students that are walking from home from school, which reminds me very much of when I was a kid, walking home from school. Uh, but we've talked about it. We've talked about, like, because both Babsy and I had childhoods that were very free. We had a lot of freedom, and I think in general, parents now, like our generation of parents, are not as willing to allow their kids the same freedom that we had as kids. And there's often this reasoning of the world is not as safe anymore, when in fact the data shows the opposite, that actually crime has decreased since we were kids. I lived in Miami, and like Florida. Oh, Hunter's not here anymore, but like I'm sure she would agree with me on this. Like Florida, like has this stigma of like it's the place of the serial killers. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the reason why I think Dexter why they set Dexter in Miami. All growing up, like it was sort of this unspoken thing that like that weird serial killer kidnappers were like lurking around every corner. I don't know how true that really was, but that was sort
Yeah.
of ingrained in us
Well,
growing up.
I always think about like Adam Walsh, who was I don't want to depress you, but he would be your age or
Yeah.
thereabouts, and that was in Florida, and that was honestly the beginning of the end for the Latchkey Kids. So,
When was that? Because I was a latchkey kid.
uh, Adam Walsh died in 1981, and I feel
I
like
was a
that I
latchkey.
know a lot about this because I have like this morbid like obsession with not
Yeah.
being kidnapped. I'm like unreasonably afraid of murder. Um, so I know all these stories that
Yeah.
my mother fed to me when I was growing up.
I
But
I
yeah,
I was a
at that
latchkey kid. I was a latchkey kid from I'd say about 1985 until 1985 until I went to college. I mean,
I
I,
was also a latchkey
yeah,
kid.
I think that the 90s, I mean, I grew up in the 90s and 2000s, and I would say that by the 90s, I think a lot of the stories that people know about like the kids on the milk carton, like Adam Walsh and other similar stories that were sort of, I mean, they were important stories to
Jacob
tell, but they were
Wetterling.
also like overrepresented in terms of like how often that actually happened. That the 80s was like the big scare for all of those stories, and then by the time I was growing up, it's like you couldn't, everyone knew all those stories, and that was kind of the bridge. I feel like my generation was the bridge between like your generation, or you know
Mm.
or your like era of growing up, and what we have now, which is,
Yeah, I
we
mean,
have more security theoretically, but
yeah, I mean, we have
and yeah,
we truly do live in a much more monitored country, and we definitely have way less of that kind of crime than we had back in the 80s. And lived in I had such a free childhood. I really did truly just bike anywhere and everywhere. And um and it's just odd, is it, that we now in hindsight recognize how dumb that was for our parents to let us do that, or are or or is there something that, because I recognize it in myself. I recognize like this fear that I have of letting Josie have the kind of freedom as a kid that I had at the
I grew
age
up
that I
that way
had.
too, John. I mean, my parents, they would just say, come home when the street lights come on.
Yeah.
And in the summertime, that was as
Same.
late as 9 o'clock.
And I
So we'd
think,
be out on
Yeah,
our bikes riding
I think that
everywhere.
I
one of the things that I think might be the cause of it is, I actually think that it might be media. I think that we've gotten
yeah,
more stories on television and film that have made us more afraid of this. We have seen more sensationalism on the stories when they do happen, and of course they do happen and will always happen. And so, because we're now getting more of a sensationalism on those stories when they happen, and media is looking to show us those stories, because of course those stories sell. Mix that with a lot of the stories in film and television, and we might be just more afraid because we are being exposed to things that should be making us afraid. Whereas my mom just didn't get those kinds of stories. And so she just wasn't afraid of it.
This might be
oh,
one
it
of the
was a
reasons I
hundred
really
percent
enjoy this miniseries too of Dash and Lily because it kind of reminds me of something that possibly could have happened when I was a kid because we were allowed to run around and do things without somebody calling neglect to our parents.
I mean,
And
maybe that is
I
part of
enjoy that
why I
about
love
the
it so much.
series. Yeah, I mean,
I think you might be right.
17-year-old kids. Yeah,
I think you might be
17-year-old
right.
kids.
There is something really enjoyable about seeing that kind of freedom in high school. High school. So I mean, we see that a bit still in I mean, look, Stranger Things, but it's usually in the
But
context of
Stranger
that of
Things
like,
is set in the 80s
it,
when we used to do
oh
that.
right, that's true. Of
And
Yeah,
course,
this
right.
Dash and
that was
Lily
the
is
whole
set in
I
point.
grew up in the 90s and I was also a latchkey kid and allowed a lot of freedom to go wherever I wanted in the neighborhood, so long as I was home by a certain
Oh,
time.
Mandy, I'm not talking about the neighborhood. I grew up in a suburb, a first ring suburb of Minneapolis, literally like 6 blocks from the edge of Minneapolis. We used to ride our bikes for miles. We'd go all the way into Minneapolis, like 10, 12 miles, 20 miles away from home, all over the place. We didn't have cell phones, we didn't have pagers. We just had to be home by a certain time. And we used to do that all the time. And we would have to take change with us to use the payphones to call our parents if we needed something. But I'm not talking about just my neighborhood. We were all over the place on our bikes, skateboards, walking, taking the bus, whatever mode of transportation. Even as young as when I was like in fifth or sixth grade, I used to go up to the public park with my neighbors, and it wasn't in our neighborhood. We had to go blocks and blocks for it.
And you make a
So,
good
Yeah,
point
we
that
didn't have access to a lot of that like we didn't, and where we lived, there wasn't a lot to go and do if we wanted to ride our bikes further. Like we would ride them like a mile or two away to like a convenience store or something like that, but there wasn't a whole lot in our area to ride our bikes to, even if we wanted to.
but
Okay,
yes,
my kids were born in 2003 and 2005. And I've raised my kids with that grand, great freedom. We live in a suburb, and they would go out when the sun came up, and they knew they had to be home when the sun went down. But they would ride their bikes for 10, 12 miles away from where we lived. But there was this little group, this little gang of boys that were always together. And me and the other parents, I guess we kind of felt that safety in the number. There was like 8 of them. They were together every day, all the time. And they've just had this great grand freedom. So I guess I'm an oddity of a parent, me and my husband and our friends in the neighborhood,
maybe
because
not.
they would bike
Maybe there are
to,
more than I think.
yeah, they would bike to parks, the pool, stores. I mean, just they were free. And then they would come home at dark to the neighborhood, but sometimes they would stay out in the neighborhood playing until like 1 o'clock in the morning because we knew they were
What?
at home base. Yeah, they'd like run from our house to Jesse's house to Mason's house, like just back and forth all over the neighborhood. I mean, well after dark. Once they touched base with all of us and they were home, they're like, we're going to Mason's. And then they'd come back here. Okay, we're going to go to Jesse's. Oh, we're going to go to Lance's. I mean, they're just all over the place.
well, I really do think that really part of my thorough enjoyment of this series was the fact that these teenagers kind of are living a life of semi freedom to enjoy where they live and do things without too much parental control.
Although I will say, and we will get into this without spoiling, that is a part of some of the sadness of the series as well. We've already seen a little touch of it, right? Which is like
With
that his
Dash. Yeah.
mom for Christmas is going to Hawaii. His dad, we don't know where his dad is, but his dad's not there. He's spending Christmas alone. And so there is this like immense amount of freedom that these characters seem like they're having, but it seems to also come with some degree of familial loneliness, right? Or isolation where these characters don't seem to, well, I'm not going to spoil, but like, at least for Dash, it doesn't seem to be that he has the freedom, but it seems to be coming with the cost of he doesn't really seem to have parents, or parents that seem to care much. So I think that that's just an interesting side of it. And I also will say that you made a really good point, Chris, about our youth that I think is even different from your Kendra, your kids, the time that they grew up in, and that is our parents had no way at all of getting in touch with us if they needed to during the day. If I biked like miles away and my mom needed to get in touch with me for whatever emergency reason, she had to wait. She had to wait until I came home, and I might not come home until the sun came down. And that isn't the
Yes.
case anymore.
Yeah, because all of our kids had cell phones at what most people consider an absurdly young age, but we could touch base with them. They could call us. We could track them with their phones. So we always knew where they were.
Right.
And that maybe made us a little more comfortable. And they're all like super responsible, like teenagers. They're independent, you know, and maybe that helped make them that way because we did give them a great amount of freedom.
Yeah.
So can
I was
I?
just well, I was just gonna say, sorry, Chris. You know, something that you just said, John, just made me think of it. Like, that the freedom is sort of juxtaposed with like familial loneliness. And what I think I really love about this show is that, the holidays can be a super lonely time for lots of people. And
Yeah,
so, like New York is a very lonely place, very lonely. There's thousands and thousands of people, and if you're alone all the time, I mean, I'm speaking from experience. If you're alone, I mean, during COVID, like if you're alone all the time, but you're in a city of, millions of people, like it's a very depressing reality. And I see that in Dash, like in his demeanor in the apartment there, is that, he's in this big city with lots and lots of people around, and everyone, um the way he says it, just like everyone is mad dashing to the next thing, and there's so much joy around him, and he's completely alone. And on every level, like both in love and in family. And I think it's really interesting that they use River, because it's such a lonely song. It's coming on Christmas. I've lost everything, and it's such a mood. It's such a thing that definitely is being portrayed here as a real feeling at Christmas time in New York. It could be really, really happy and really, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Atmospheric and fun. And there's like this fun feeling going on. But if you're not feeling that feeling, it feels unbelievably lonely.
yeah. I was just gonna say because I realized what time it was, and I don't know how much longer John you plan on sticking around. But I wanted to go back to where you were talking about the reveal of Lily and her face at the end of the episode. And I really love
Yes.
that
I loved
part of
it.
the show because there they are. He's looking right at the person and that he eventually is going to be trying to find, but before he comes across that book.
Yes. That's what I mean when I say really, really clever narrative. Where it's like we've now gone back to the beginning, and he actually hasn't even begun the puzzle yet. Think about that. He's now looking, and it seems to be that there is a spark of chemistry that both of them are experiencing in that moment, and neither of them know at this point that they are going to be on this odd little journey together. And I just think that's super clever. Obviously, it's like total, as Stacy put it, total serendipity. Um, I know she's talking about the movie Serendipity, but like, but it is serendipity. But that's for me. That's what That's why I gravitate to a story. Is I want to see extraordinary moments. Obviously they help me understand my life, and my place in the world as a human. But I'm drawn to stories of extraordinary circumstances and extraordinary people, and I think that that's what this is. And I think that that moment really really says it best, right? Which, through this like narrative that like these two are sort of destined for each other.
Well, and they're destined before he finds the book, because
Yeah.
he says, "Oh, at least someone knows all the words." At least, like, he says that in the very first scene, at least someone knows all the verses, because she's the addition who
Yeah.
comes to know all the verses. And so, like, even if he never found the book, he has a moment of recognition with this other human being that, like, we are the same. We, like, I know the third verse and so do you. And so that makes us both cool, and that makes us both connected in this moment. And that's why he's smiling at her, because she knows the third verse and he's thankful for that. And so it's just like, it's kind of like Serendipity, the movie, in that way, where it's like, they didn't need the quest to know that, like, they were right for each other, in that moment. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, the quest is really fun though. So it's like, well, now what's going to happen with the quest? We don't know. But I think it's really interesting that in the very first scene, he's like, oh, at least somebody got it. Like, somebody in this world is like me.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I really like the way that they put this together. I mean, we get glimpses of her. She's putting the book on the shelf, but you can't see what she looks like. We see her walk into the pizza parlor, but you can't see what she looks like. We see her walk out. And I really like that about the show, and then the kind of back and forth, and but yeah, they bring it right back to the beginning. Now I'm just rambling. I love it.
And
A
I
Rambling.
bum
love
that
Boomer.
bum
I can't Boomer.
for this series, unfortunately.
You can save it for next year when we all watch it again
Mm-hmm.
together.
Yeah, I will. I will.
I can't believe they didn't make one okay boomer joke.
Kendra, did you say that you have watched the series, or that you've only read the book, never watched the series?
I've watched the series
Oh, okay.
and I purchased
The book.
the books, but I haven't read the books yet.
Got it. Got it.
I kind of tend to do that backwards. I watch the movie or the series and then I read the books.
I do that
Got it.
sometimes. Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist, I read that book first and then I watched the movie and I liked both of them. And I've always meant to read this book and then I just kind of get sidetracked with other things. But now I kind of want to read it because we're watching it.
Well, I think the reason I do that now, it's the rebel in me. When I was growing up, I wasn't allowed, like, if something was adapted from a book, my grandparents wouldn't let me watch it until I had read the book. And now that I have freedom, I'm like, I'm going to do it the opposite way. And this is adapted from the first novel. There's two other books in this series as of yet.
Interesting. So,
Um,
Netflix did not renew,
Oh,
which
and I
oh,
was
which I
so
think
that's a
disappointed.
shame.
They
which I
waited
think is
almost a
really a
full
shame. I
year
mean,
to announce it too.
what's up?
They waited almost a full year to announce that too.
What a
I mean, like,
bummer.
yeah.
I
So
mean,
I really thought we
I
were gonna.
really don't get it. Like Netflix just like willy-nilly uh renews all kinds of stuff, like, and operates under this, like, no, like, we can't have enough content, and I mean, this is a popular book series, and the first series is fantastic, and it just seems so odd that they give almost every season at least a second season, and I'm wondering if it's possible that they maybe didn't get along with the creators, or that, like, there was some some drama or something
I
because
kind
it's
of wonder if it's because they couldn't film it last year because of the pandemic.
oh, that might be possible. That the pandemic made it really difficult to actually do it, and it would have ended up costing too much. That actually makes sense.
Because
But
if
it but
you
it seems like it seems odd that they wouldn't just be like, we're not going to let you know if we're going to renew it or not. We're just not going to say anything about it.
yeah, they didn't say anything about it for a long time, so I always wondered if they were just gonna go back to it eventually. But they probably filmed all this stuff the year before during Christmas time, since everything is done up. And you listen to Diana and Sabrina talk about all these places are real places, so they probably filmed it, and then they would have done then the second one maybe last year for this year. But last year
Yeah,
everything was kind of
so much
shut down.
didn't happen last year that, would have had to for the scenery alone.
Yeah,
Right.
and I've heard of other streaming services canceling shows only because during the pandemic it would have cost too much because they would have to pay to retain those actors
Yep.
for the project.
That's actually what happened. This is so. I mean, maybe you were reading the same article that I did. Did you read it about Why the Last Man?
Yes, yes, that's what it
Yeah.
was
Why the last?
because I did like that show. Did you watch it?
Yeah, I did. I didn't really. Why the Last Man is one of my, if not my favorite piece of literature. It's a graphic novel
Yeah, I
that
know, and it's a great graphic novel.
I love it beyond words, and so I can't in good faith say that I loved the series because they deviated too much from from the comic
Yeah,
from what I
yeah,
love
but
about it.
I did enjoy the series, but I do like the graphic novel as
But that story is so fascinating. The reason why that series was canceled really had everything to do with the pandemic and retaining actors like Diane Keaton. Or wait, no, that was not Diane Keaton. Who's that? That's
well. Diane Lane.
Diane Lane. Sorry, Diane Lane. Um, it was all about they could not afford to keep them on a retainer for any longer, and and they couldn't green light the series without like it was just this like whole like storm of budgetary concerns that were all of them linked to the pandemic. And FX uh is not in the doesn't isn't in the habit of announcing cancellations either. That's sort of another thing, is that they typically wait for a series to be over before they announce that it's not going to be coming back, or not going to be renewed. And they're also extremely creator forward. So they also like really give creators the benefit of the doubt and do their best to renew. So it really was one of those things where like they basically had them on these like these contractual retainers that cost several $1 million. And if they wanted to renew the show, they would need to put all of the cast, including some of the big cast members, in another set of retainers that may have ended up costing them millions of dollars for no reason, if for whatever reason at the end of the season it looked like it didn't get the numbers that it needed and they weren't going to renew it. So they just, without even knowing whether the series was going to be successful or not, they just canned it, which is also really like crazy, right? Because the series I don't think did that great. Like it wasn't like a huge hit, but from what they were saying, if it even if it had been a huge hit, it still they would have had to cancel it because of the risk.
It's very sad that that happened to all these different shows, but that's been my kind of guess as to why this one didn't get the second season that it probably would have gotten. And I think a lot of it had to do with not being able to film last year. Plus, these actors, you know, maybe they had other projects and stuff that they ended up committing to as well.
You'd think though some of that would get out. Like you'd think that they would mention it, and you'd think that they would say, "Well, we're gonna renew it when we can," or we're gonna do it when we can. But maybe not. Maybe it's like we need to know what our slates are going to look like, and this just doesn't have all of the parts needed to move into another season, and so we have to move on. If in the future, you know it's possible to do this again, we will treat it as its own new thing, that happens. It's like Gilmore Girls, right? Like, Gilmore Girls ended. It's not like they canceled the show. It's not like they said we're going to leave this open for the possibility that at some point we'll in 10 years have a revival of it. We are canceling it now. And if in the future we ever are able to reboot it, then we'll see what that looks like when it comes. And that may be the fate of this show. That like in 5 to 10 years that it's somehow rebooted. It would then be without the actors that we get here, because obviously they would be much older, unless the book has them 10 years older. I don't know.
I haven't read either of them, so I don't know. Well, I'm looking forward to episode 2. I'm really tempted to hit play,
Oh
but I
yeah.
won't. I'll
Yeah.
wait for tomorrow.
Yeah. Episode 2 is called Lily. So episode 2, I think that it would be safe to say probably is from the viewpoint of Lily. um, and that's going to be really fun to watch. But right now we're still in the exposition of the series, so we're still in that, like, getting to know who these characters are. I just think it's a very clever way of getting to know the characters. I think that it's setting up a really clever um, narrative uh, narrative arc for both characters, for the love story. And I also just am delighted to see New York City at Christmas time. So those three things had me pretty hooked from the get go. But the series does, like, it does you know pull you in. Once we get past the exposition, the actual story is it's got lots of twists and turns, and it's fun, I think, which is
And
why I believe that I will win the 100 Colonel. All right, everyone. I'm going to head out. I'm going to head out and over to this tin can of cookies, and I'm going to
I love hearing
eat
the
one.
tin. Just
I'm
painting
gonna,
us a
Yes.
picture.
I'm gonna just eat one of these things. So I will see all of you very soon. Thank you so much for watching with me, and I can't wait to get into episode 2 tomorrow.
Thanks for hosting, John.
Yep.
have a good rest of the day.
Yep. See you
Bye.
soon.
Bye.
Bye.